Good morning. I am Alberto Villarreal, Managing Director of Nepanoa Transformation Advisory, and also a board member of the Asociación de Empresarios Mexicanos in Chicago. I will be the host of today's webinar, where we will be talking about immigration, the role of the consulates, the North American consulates in Mexico, how immigration impacts the community in the United States. And when we say community, we talk about the working community, the business community, but we also talk about the day-to-day lifestyles in the United States. And also, what is the current state of immigration? And what do we expect for the next 12 to 24 months? We all know that the presidential debate happened last night, and there will be impacts in the upcoming months with regards to immigration. Today, we have a fantastic panel of participants with us, and I do not want to take a stab at introducing them because I am sure that I am going to miss something and perhaps misrepresent their grand careers, specifically on the topics of specifically on the U.S.-Mexico relationship. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Patty Garcia. Good morning, Patty. How are you?
Yes, good morning, good morning. So would you like for me to start right now to do introduction?
Yes, I would like you to introduce yourself, please, Patty.
Perfect. So Patty Garcia, my parents came to this country from Jalisco, Mexico, and found a home in Chicago. I am the first generation that has been born in the U.S. Growing up between La Villita, which is a predominantly Mexican neighborhood, and Cicero. And for me, growing up in the Southwest side has completely shaped my values, my interests, and my trajectory. I began volunteering, doing civic education, voter education, and ended up, graduating at 25 with a PhD, not sure where to go. And what ended up being a temporary job in a campaign changed my whole life, right? I redirected my professional career after that. And 10 years later now, I've worked in over 22 states on Latino policy and politics along the U.S.-Mexico border. And now I'm very fortunate enough to be back in my hometown, working with the first Mexicano from the Midwest, Congressman Chuy Garcia. And so I'm very, very lucky, right, that I can make an impact directly to my own community and provide services at the federal, state, and local level and work with other elected officials as well. Thank you.
Patty, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to have you in today's panel, and I am sure that your insights will be very valuable to everybody. Javier Maupomé, please go ahead.
Thank you, Alberto. Buenos días a todas y todos. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm Javier Maupomé. I'm a career diplomat. I joined the Foreign Service in 2010. I served then in the Consulate General of Mexico in Denver as Consul for Protection and Legal Affairs. Then after 5 years of being there, I went back to the ministry to work at the Protection General Directorate for Protection of Mexicans Abroad. I was the director for policy and information under the direction of Ambassador Reina Torres. And then I took a leave of absence to incorporate myself to the Ministry of Government as private secretary and chief of staff of the Undersecretary of Media down in Mexico. Then went back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, work at the Institute of Mexicans Abroad. And then a year ago, I was posted here at the Consulate General of Mexico in Chicago as Consul for Legal Affairs and Protection. So my whole professional career has been dedicated to protect the interests and rights of the Mexican community here in the United States. Not only the rights, but also empower them as providing more tools for their integration here in the society that they contribute so much every single day.
Javier, thank you very much for the introduction. And last but not least, Kalman Resnick, known in some Mexican circles and Latino circles as Kalman. So Kalman, please go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
My name's Kalman, and I got the apodo Kalman many years ago when I worked on 18th Street in the 1970s with the Legal Services Program. Suddenly, my strange name became more familiar to people. It's a joy to be on the panel with Javier and Patty. I work with Javier frequently in defending Mexican immigrants in Chicago, and I work with Patty every day. And with Jesús Garcia, we worked with me on 18th Street at the Legal Services Center for Immigrants in the 1970s. I'm a Jewish American. I am the son, grandson, and great-grandson of Jewish immigrants to the United States and Canada. We battled to be here. My grandmother was denied entry to the United States as an orphan at age 17 at Ellis Island and ended up in Canada. My mom was born in Canada. They came without documents in the 1920s, and when my mom was 8 years old, she was deported from the United States back to Canada. Immigration is an important issue to my community, and it drove my interest in becoming an immigrant rights lawyer. I've been a lawyer for the last 47 years and defending the Mexican and other immigrant communities in Chicago. It's delightful to be with you all.
Thank you very much, Kalman. Definitely. I'm so glad that I let each one of you introduce yourselves because I was pretty sure I was going to miss something. So let's begin. Let's start with you, Javier. If you know, we can to get things started. What is the role of the American consulates today, both the American consulates in Mexico and the Mexican consulates in the United States in this specific circumstances, 2020, which has been such a heavy year, and you know, things have just changed dramatically, specifically in immigration? What are the roles? What's the role that, you know, the consulates are playing?
Thank you, Alberto. I would start with a very probably obvious thing nowadays, but that has been developing for probably 3 decades now. That is the integration of both Mexican and American societies. We are an integrated region, not only because of NAFTA, now USMCA, but of our communities. They have crossed one border or the other, and there's a vibrant community in both sides. Of course, the number of Mexican nationals here in the United States does not compare with the American nationals in Mexico, but that's one of the roles that the consulates have. In terms of the Mexican consular network, I would say that it's the biggest consular network in the world. No other country has as many consulates as Mexico has in the United States. And the role of the Mexican consulate has developed also throughout time. We're talking not only about the services that we provide, like consular IDs and passports, which are the first line in terms of protecting the rights of Mexican nationals, but also they have developed to be something more profound, in which they strengthen relationships in the local level, but also all throughout the national level. So we're talking about entities of the government that transform local societies and local businesses, and we are making consular diplomacy. So in the context of COVID-19, the closures of both consulates here in the United States and in Mexico has been very difficult for different people. In terms of Mexican nationals that have been working here with a working visa and then went back to Mexico to renew it, they have faced a problem of COVID-19 regulations, which has derived in the possibility to renew those passports or those visas. Here, the months where we were closed and only addressing emergencies has proven to be very difficult for our community. We have been working 24/7, I mean, literally since the pandemic started. But now, since June, when we were able to reopen the consulate, we have been servicing people from Monday through Sunday, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And still, there's a backlog in terms of the appointments that people need. So consulates and government has proven to be very essential, even if in these 21st century times in the context of a pandemic.
Javier, thank you very much for providing that insight into this 2020, you know, the role of the consulates and how hard, you know, you have worked to provide service to all the people that need it. Kalman, I'm gonna switch to you for this one. I mean, understanding, you know, what the consulates do, and also, you know, with your experience working cross borders, you know, and of course, Javier just explaining, you know, the hard work that they have done throughout this year. How do you envision at least the rest of 2020, you know, in 2021, to actually evolve for the consulates?
First of all, with the exception of F1 and J1 student visas and dependents of student visa holders or applicants, the consular process is largely frozen in Mexico, the visa issuance process. So with few exceptions, if you are in Mexico and need a visa to come to the United States, right now, other than students, it's almost impossible to get a visa. That is true for non-immigrants coming here for visits, for business, for employment. It's also true for people seeking immigrant visas based on employment or based on family members who are US citizens or permanent residents. So there are many, many people stuck in Mexico who want to return to the United States or come to the United States to join family or for employment purposes. And this crisis is increasing. More and more families are separated by the border and can't be rejoined because of the freeze on visa issuances.
Thank you, Kalman. And Javier, touching into those insights that Kalman just mentioned, what are the plans for the consulate, in the near future, right? To be able, we know that you're working 24/7. What are the plans to get over this hump or this volume of requests as the economy opens, right? And as we, and as the border, starts to be more flexible to cut on a certain way, right? After COVID, what are the plans, or what does the consulates have in mind to deal with this volume of requests?
We're, as I said before, we're working as much as we can to provide services as much as we can. But we have to be very observant of what local authorities are saying regarding the COVID restrictions. We want to be open as long as we can. With the winter coming and the cold season right across the corner, we need to be very vigilant of our security and safety, both in the workplace and at home. So that's for one part. Keep on informing our community to be vigilant and careful in regards to their health. And also, we have been developing a new way to outreach our community through social media. Before, the consulate was as a big fair of different community organizations. Even Congressman Garcia has been here providing information and services to the community. Attorneys such as Kalman were here providing legal assistance, but now we cannot do that. So we have done it through social media, telephone assistance, and that's a way where we have found a new way to outreach and inform our community. Just to mention one example, last September 15, we have our celebration of independence. We have had over 100,000 views of that Facebook Live, which is amazing. We are definitely one of the biggest Mexican-American communities in the whole United States. So it's Facebook Live and social media has proven to be a very effective way to outreach and inform our community. So we're gonna continue on that, probably highlighting more the importance of health and safety, and of course, the rights. It's really important in these circumstances for our community to be informed and to know their rights well.
Fantastic, Javier. Thank you very much for mentioning that. And that's the perfect segue to our second topic, which is, community, right? You mentioned how you are communicating these days. And I am glad that, that the consulates are using every means possible to communicate with the people. But, thinking specifically about community, Congressman Garcia, Patty, given the current state of immigration, what do you think are the biggest impacts in the communities in the United States?
Yeah, so I would say that the impact of the workforce has definitely been seen, right? You've seen in our office, we've received call after call, people experiencing delays in their work permits, right? And we know that employers vary in the flexibility that they do have, whether it's a DACA recipient, TPS, or someone else, right, other status. And so the biggest impact in terms of processing has been on being able to someone to renew their employment. I think one of the other issues that on the health side that maybe we don't talk about as often is, you know, with the current state of immigration and the rhetoric that comes from this administration, there's a fear that has been created in our communities, fear of even accessing services that they have the rights to access. So for example, right, I'm sure many of you have heard of the word public charge, right? That if carga pública, that if you cost our country any money, quote unquote, right, that you are then not eligible for other services. And so that in itself, so families that can be mixed status. So if the parents or one of the parents is undocumented or different status, immigration status, but the children are U.S. immigrants, right? You lose the services that that entire family could have because of that fear. And so you've seen in different cities across the U.S. when the announcement of public charge was made, this sort of people rolled off of medical services and support services like CHIP and TANF, all these different things that help provide an additional support to children and families. And so even as something as simple as now during the pandemic, people are afraid to get tested, even though it's free, even though under the federal law, you're not supposed to ask for immigration status, but that is the reality of our current conditions that have been placed, the rhetoric that it has instilled this fear. I think one of the other sort of underlying outcomes that we have seen in the community that you hear in more of like the medical professionals, the early childhood sector, some of the teachers might talk about this, is the consequence that this has for children, regardless of citizenship, right? That if you have this constant, nonstop attack on an immigrant community, it feeds into not only the fear, but this sort of what professionals call toxic stress, right? That the children, it actually impacts their psyche and their development. And, you know, you can only imagine a 4 or 5-year-old having to be concerned as to whether they will find their parent back home when they get out of school, or if on their way to work, you know, the parent might be picked up. And we've seen it. And I think that that's the reality of where a community is living right now, that they're living in a constant state of fear. It's not healthy in any way. And I think that, you know, in terms of the impact that workforce health, those pieces impact everything else, right? And one of the other areas that I do want to mention is education, right? As it was mentioned earlier, there's some exceptions being made on student visas, but earlier this summer when we saw the Trump administration announced changes to student visas, you saw a very quick reaction from the university systems. University systems that would be largely impacted, that rely on international students to be able to remain public institutions. And so, I mean, you saw over 400 institutions across, you know, private and Ivy League institutions jump to the defense of not only for student visas, but also for DACA recipients. And, you know, it brings me to the next point on DACA, that we know at this point the contribution that DACA recipients have to our country. And it is unfortunate that even though they pay taxes, right, that they still don't have full access to the rights to really integrate in this country. And from the private sector, from the public sector, you've seen this sort of support for DACA recipients, but the reality that you know, that the administration continues to try to step over the community, stop and end DACA, and that's where we're at right now. That and depending on how things turn out in November, that we have one person who's the current administration who's ready to end DACA and end the lives and the prosperity for 800,000 people and their families, and lose over $360 billion in our economy. So, you know, those are big impacts at the large sort of institutional level, but also on the daily level for our families.
Congressman Garcia, that's Kalman, yeah, I was going to go to you. So please, Kalman, go ahead. Thank you, Congressman Garcia. Go ahead, Kalman.
There's a divergence between the war on legal immigrants and undocumented immigrants and immigrant families and the U.S.'s greater dependence on immigrant workers during the pandemic. So we have the role of Mexican workers in the United States is more important than ever because of the importance of food production, food processing, and the service industry of delivering food, delivering packages. And that dependence on immigrant labor is increased by the pandemic. At the same time that there's a war on both legal immigrants and undocumented immigrants. And that's really important to understand, because I think the long-range future of the community and the defense of the community depends upon convincing this country of the important role of immigrants from Latin America and why we need to defend them and legalize their status and legalize and unite their families. Because the importance of immigrants to the future of the country makes it essential that we find ways to resolve the undocumented status of and the mixed status of many immigrant families. And there's the future. It comes from having to understand the role of immigrants. The war on immigrants comes exactly from the fear of some white Americans, and certainly this has been used by this administration, who are afraid of the changing percentage of whites in the population and the increasing diversity of our population. That war on immigrants, which is stoked by this administration, was shown last night in the comments of the president about the Proud Boys and about his refusal to disassociate from white racists and white supremacists. So there's a future here for the community to defend itself and to gain support for its defense out of the essential role of Mexican workers in the United States. And we need to use that in terms of creating a new policy in the future that welcomes immigrant families and brings together our two countries.
Thank you very much for that input, Kalman. We will get to the presidential debate and then a little bit on the future on the next question. On this one, after hearing your comments, I want to go back to Patty here, to Congressman Garcia. Patty, we've spoken about the impacts, right? We know there's an impact on jobs, there's an impact on health, there's an impact on education, DACA. Here the question is, what we have experienced over the last 3 years, how much time do we think it will take to recover? And if it recovers? And this is taken into consideration, number one, what the decisions of the administration, but also, COVID, which we have lived in 2020. So thinking about the impacts and recovery, and as Kalman just, when he mentioned in his statement is, policies going forward that are inclusive, right, of immigration. How much time do you think and what key actions should be taken, that would improve the communities in the United States, via immigration?
Yeah, so there's been a few polls and research that has been released locally from spearheaded by the Latino Policy Forum and nationally too under Latino Decisions, looking at that piece of recovery, right? What will it take? The reality is that there are jobs that were eliminated during this pandemic that will never come back. And that is what we have to grapple with, right? That we have to create new streams, bring in new workforce opportunities, create new public-private partnerships. But in terms of a recovery timeline, we need to focus on the short term of what we can do now and what sectors are impacted and can quickly transition. But I think in terms of the long term, it requires a plan that includes more innovative approaches and new sectors, identifying other sectors that we can work with. One of the issues that I think really struck me, right, from a poll that Latino Decisions and Latino Policy Forum did during the pandemic, they polled Latinos. They asked them, right now, right, if you lost your job, how much money do you have in your savings account? And the reality that the majority of them, not even $500. And when you look at housing, bills, like, you know, rent, childcare. You cannot, that's unrealistic to survive with a family of 4 or 5 with $500 in your savings account, and all of a sudden, you know, the como se dice, the rug is pulled underneath your feet, and you have no sort of economic stability. So that's something that for the states, you know, one of the issues that I do want to raise in terms of what this means for small businesses, what it means for entrepreneurs, right? At the congressional level, Congress since May passed the HEROES Act. And part of that package, this was the fourth package to stimulate the economy, was to include support for small businesses, to include support for schools, for hospitals, for health centers, for students, right? Removing that portion, at least, of that student debt, you know, ways to really contribute to our economy and move it forward, advance it. The reality is that the Senate leadership refuses to bring that to a real vote and negotiate, and the Trump administration also refuses to negotiate on the real things that people need that will make a difference, right? The fact that when you look at the breakdown of small business support from this administration under what they call the PPP loans, or any of the other grants that were completely free and have to pay back, the majority of those went to wealthier corporations and organizations that were already well established. And in a state in Illinois, where, you know, we've got in the state and in the city a deficit that if we don't get additional federal support, you know, we're going to have to really think of new streams of revenue. It's going to pose a challenge to other states. So I think that it's really important that as we move forward, right, we focus on trying to support a federal bill that does provide direct municipal and state support, because that'll help fuel a little bit of the economy, and provide support right now for unemployed individuals. This year for Illinois, they had, I believe, over 1 million claims. That's the largest number in the history of the state of Illinois. And you're seeing that all over the US, right? All these states that have maxed out in terms of unemployment claims. And unless they get federal support, they will not be able to one, meet the deficit, and then 2, advance the economy.
Thank you very much, Congressman Garcia. That's a good insight, specifically on the small business piece, you know, and how much impact does it have in the economy and access to funds and capital to survive, right? Javier, would you like to close this topic around community, you know, just with any thoughts?
Yes, thank you very much, Alberto. I think that both Patty and Kalman were very on point in regards to how essential immigrant workers are, and also pointing out the disparities between the communities. This pandemic has disproportionately impacted the immigrant community and has disproportionately impacted women amongst that immigrant community. Women working here in Illinois and the United States are typically in works that cannot be telecommuted. So they were going to work while we were in a quarantine and pandemic. They also, if they are in a household that is not egalitarian, they have to choose between taking care of the kids, because now the schools are closed and daycare is closed, or going back to work. So we cannot be unaware of this issue. Also, we have been seeing an increase in terms of remittances from the US to Mexico. In part, that increase has been because of women being part now in a more relevant way in the workforce. So we should not take our look out from the women and the importance of making this society more egalitarian, both for immigrant community, but also for women. So I think that the essential workers and women have proven their contribution to these societies, both in Mexico and in the United States. But here specifically, we have seen how immigrants were going to work, providing food to our tables, giving us healthcare. So I think it's important to just take a step back and see how important the immigrant community is for this country.
Thank you, Javier. As a follow-up question there, and it has nothing to do with immigration. Well, maybe it does, I think, indirectly. What do you think is the main reason remittances have increased between the U.S. and Mexico in this year, 2020? If we could select one reason.
One reason,
Or the top two, right? Just to keep it short.
Well, one and probably the most probably obvious one is the exchange rate between Mexico and the United States. So I think during the pandemic was going up, but there is a factor of family. And the main reason why our immigrant community is here is trying to improve their lives for them and for their families back in Mexico. So even though we are in a pandemic, and even though they lost their jobs, or they have less hours, or they're being furloughed for how many days or weeks, they have savings, and those savings they divide here to get by, and also for their families in Mexico to get by as well. And this is a global pandemic, so the virus was affecting here in the United States, but also in Mexico. So I think that those two factors are really important, and it goes back to family and goes back to the reason why people are here and why people immigrate in the first place.
Thank you, Javier. And I know that the audience is here to listen to the three of you and not my opinion, but personally, I believe it's because, in Mexico, things are also pretty bad, right? And there's a lot of unemployment, and there's people seeking for different resources. And in our very Mexican fashion, when things, get bad, we help each other. So based on what you said, I would add, that piece, which is, people want to help. Let's get to the third topic. And I'm going to start with Kalman. The presidential debate happened last night, and I think that everybody was aware of the literal battle that happened. What should we expect going forward, Kalman, from an immigration perspective? And feel free to say, what happens if we choose right or if we choose left, right? How does it affect immigration in particular?
Well, I have an article in front of me from the Washington Post, September 29th. ICE preparing targeted arrests in sanctuary cities, amplifying the president's campaign theme. What we're going to see over the next month is increased attacks upon immigrant communities in every way. And we are going to see those on the streets, in raids. We're going to see that in even more hostile attitude coming out of the USCIS and ICE and US Customs and Border Protection. What last night showed is that this president intends to disrupt our democracy, if not end it. And he is using his powers and the powers of the federal government to try to make the election a farce so that he can then declare himself the winner and get the courts, the Supreme Court, to back him up. That's why it is so important that we have a massive turnout of US citizens voting in this election to demonstrate a complete rejection of his politics so that we can defeat him and avoid any ambiguity as to the results of the election. That's why it is so important that I spend all my free time calling Latino voters in Florida, Arizona, Texas, Iowa, Wisconsin,
Michigan.
That is the most important thing we can do for the future of the community and the future of this country and the future of Mexico. We have to defeat Donald Trump, and we must do it in massive numbers. And that's why it's so important that we spend our time doing that. If anyone needs information about how to get involved in the campaign, calling Latino voters, using your Spanish to communicate to voters across the country and to young Latinos especially, just give me a call, 847-899-1311, and I will get you hooked up with various groups who are calling Latino voters.
Thank you for that. Come on, can you repeat the number again? Because you said it pretty quickly so that people can actually take note of it.
847-899-1311.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kalman. Patty, same question. What can we expect going forward?
So simple as this. You can project the future by looking at the past and the history. And what has Trump shown us since day one, even before he became president, when he was candidate, right? He attacked specifically Mexicans, the Latino community, but specifically Mexicans. And now he's got the support of all the agencies, and he's now empowered to be able to use these agencies to his own advantage. I think that there's two pictures here, right? You've got, if you're looking down a road, you've got on one side of the road a nation that embraces immigrants, that wants to put forth the Dream and Promise Act, HR 6, that you've got a leader that is ready to make immigration a priority on day one, and who has committed and said, on my first day, I propose and I will introduce something that will provide a pathway to citizenship for 11 million immigrants. Or you take the other road, and on that road, right, it's a nation that continues to criminalize and deport immigrants, that doesn't see the value of immigrants, that thinks that it's okay to sterilize women, right? And you're talking about 2020, when we think that women's rights have advanced, and that's something that we can all agree on, a complete sort of attack on our human, civic rights, and what we've seen image after image, right? Children in cages. It's a very, very stark and differing sort of paths. So I think for our community, it is, as Kalman has said, it is very important. It is literally a life or death situation at this point. We've seen how this president has completely botched his approach to addressing COVID, right? The fact that there is no coincidence of why Latino and Black numbers of cases and deaths are overrepresented versus other groups. These are structural issues that, yes, maybe some of them have been in place a little bit longer, but under Trump, he's threatened to end Obamacare. He's threatened to eliminate access to immigrant families. Something as simple as, we've got our tax-paying mixed status families that, regardless of citizenship, they're paying their taxes, and yet when it came time to provide them help in the time that they needed the most, this Trump administration refused to give them support. But yet, on the flip side, it's okay for him to, pay the very minimum. So I think that it is very clear the options that the community has right now when it comes to immigration.
Thank you very much, Patty. And Javier, you from a perspective of the Mexican government, right, where you pretty much have to work, right, with whatever administration is chosen. What is your perspective going forward?
Well, as a consular officer and a diplomat in this country, we cannot comment on the election process. But in regards to the Mexican community, as we have been ready to protect and inform our community, we are going to keep on doing that. It's important for a community to know their rights, to know how to react with interactions with authorities. Here in Illinois and Chicago, there's no collaboration between law enforcement and immigration authorities. But our consulate not only covers Illinois, but also the northern part of Indiana. So we have to be aware of that also. Recently, there was an operation conducted by ICE where over 80 people were arrested. So we are trying to provide consular assistance to these persons. We need to know who was arrested, and we need to get these calls from the community saying, hey, my dad, my uncle, my aunt was arrested and he's detained by immigration. So we can provide assistance, and also invite our community to come to the consulate or call the consulate so they can get immigration assistance. Things have changed during the time, but not only in the framework of the immigration systems and the immigration policies, but also in regards to their lives. So probably a DACA recipient married a US citizen, or someone was sadly a victim of a crime. So there may be immigration reliefs for their situation. So it's important for them to get an immigration diagnosis so they can move forward and not be in this uncertainty. But so just in a nutshell, we are ready to protect and assist, and we invite our community to be informed and to reach to the consulate so we can help them and orient them.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing?
Of course.
One of the things that we've seen in these last, I would say, half a year. So, every 10 years we do the census, and it's something that is required by the Constitution, that regardless of citizenship, everyone gets counted. And the reality that when we look at the districts that are largely Latino predominant, you're seeing a very low response rate. And it has to do with this immigration environment, right? Walking down 26th Street, walking down Division and Belmont, Cragen, from the north to the south side of Chicago, when we're having these one-on-one conversations, asking people at the lavanderias or the grocery stores, why haven't you filled it out? It's this fear, right? That the messaging from the administration from day one when it came to the census was, well, no, immigrants shouldn't be counted. And no, anyone who fills it out, the data will be shared with the other agencies like DHS, and we'll put proceedings for deportation in order, right? This messaging is more than just words. It has had an impact in our communities. And today's the last day for the census, the official day for the census. And even though the courts have been on the side of several groups to extend that deadline, the reality, just like with DACA, is that unless the agency, administration, or the leadership is willing to comply with the directive of the court, that's not going to happen. And so, it's the unfortunate reality that even things that were protected under the Constitution have sort of been shaken up under this administration.
Thank you very much, Patty. To follow up on that, given that it's the last day of the census, I mean, what do you think is a recommendation for people, given the messages that have been, sent? I mean, should they participate? Should they not? What should they do?
They have to fill it out. They must. We've done, I can't even count how many events we've done virtually, in person. And we knew during the pandemic that was going to add a different challenge, right? A barrier. And about July, statewide coalitions decided to organize and actually start doing more community events again. We started hosting monthly meetings to share some of the best practices and hear, how the community was able to connect. But the message has been clear. Everyone deserves to be counted. That is your civic duty. That is the way that we make our power known, right? Especially if you're an immigrant and don't have the right to vote. This is your way to make your voice heard, right? Participating in the census, and your information will be completely confidential, as it is protected by the Constitution.
Perfect. Thank you, Patty. And this household, we filled it out pretty quickly, but then I kept getting requests and knocks on my door, and I ended up printing out the confirmation, just like, guys, we already did it. Right? We don't want to double count anybody here. To close, and let's start with Javier. Javier, what is your wish for the U.S.-Mexico relationship as we go towards the last quarter of 2020 and then 2021?
My wish would be integration in all ways. I think it's important for economies to be integrated more and to have an agile commerce between our countries. That will spill over in a very positive way, as we have seen it in the past 20 or so years. But also integration locally. We need our community to be integrated, and that means knowing the rights, being knowledgeable in how to exercise them, but also being perceived as a contribution for the society. I mentioned earlier about our independence celebration back in 15th of September. And there was a week of celebration where people that were in their neighborhoods and they were not allowed to celebrate there and parade, they went to downtown Chicago. And there was a lot of honking and a lot of noise and a lot of celebration, but it was peaceful. And there was some perceptions and some reactions negatively to this Mexicans per se. And we need to combat that. We need to combat that with knowledge, with information, and also with an approach that distances itself from racism and bigotry. We need to be assertive of what the immigrant community does for the American society, for their neighborhoods, for the city and counties. So my wish would be more integration and strengthening the collaboration ties between Mexico and the United States at all levels, locally, statewide, and nationwide.
Fantastic. Thank you, Javier. Just for our audience, those that do not live in downtown Chicago, as I do, the celebration was a great celebration. It lasted 2 nights, if I recall correctly, here in downtown Chicago. But the key piece there is that it was a celebration of Mexico's independence. It was not a protest per se, right? And many people did confuse it one with the other, and it wasn't that. It was celebration of the independence of our country, specifically because we were not allowed to parade and celebrate, the way that we usually do. Thank you, Javier, for that. I was going to go to you. Go ahead, Kalman.
The issue is not whether there'll be Mexican workers in the United States. The United States is completely dependent on Mexican workers. It's whether they will have the rights of residents, the rights to have their families with them, and the political and legal rights of other workers in America. But this is not whether we have Mexican workers. They'll be here because we're dependent. The pandemic has only shown how dependent. What we need to do is develop the political force so that we legalize the undocumented workers. We unite families in the United States that want to be in the United States so that we don't have separation of families. And we end the horror of all the mixed status families where people are US citizens, permanent residents, DACA recipients, and undocumented. And that is a political problem that requires a political solution. And as Chicago has shown, as Illinois has shown, when Mexicans participate in the political process, we establish safeguards for the Mexican community, and we have the structures of government protecting Mexican and Mexican-American communities. So my hope for the future is increased political participation, not just in Chicago and Illinois, but around the country. And that's why Congressman Garcia has been going to Iowa and Nevada and other states to support the political rights of the Mexican communities in those states.
Thank you very much, Kalman. Greatly appreciate that. Patty,
Yes.
Congressman Garcia, to close it out, what's your hope, what's your wish for the U.S.-Mexico relationship throughout the rest of 2020 and 2021?
Well, the undeniable fact, right, that we know that the U.S. and Mexico have intertwined relationship, right? It is a completely bounded relationship, and we do need mutual sort of alignment on a variety of issues. I think one of the topics that we haven't necessarily raised in this conversation is around asylum and asylees, right? And I know that that's been a topic that here locally our organizations have brought up. We had a group of lawyers that went out to some of the border towns in Texas to protect and to provide some legal support. But the reality that what the program being MPP or migrant program, that asylum program would not be possible if Mexico would not have complied with it, right? And so I think it's really important to recognize the role of Mexico in the U.S. immigration policy too. That both of the countries have a say, have a choice to make things better. And I do know that, most recently this week, later last week, we did hear a response from the Mexican government against some of the atrocities that we were hearing out of southern U.S. with women and hysterectomies, right? That's something that we can all unite behind, but I think that we need to see more of that. We need to see this defense for the Mexicanos coming from the Mexican government, because you can't imagine being Mexican in the U.S. and feeling the attack from the U.S. president, and then not as much defense from the Mexican administration either. It's sort of the morale. So right now what we need something to lift our spirit, to restore our hope in both of the countries. And we know that there is, the relationships have been better in the past, and that there are ways for us to bring forth a better mutual relationship amongst both of the countries.
Thank you very much. Congressman Garcia. Kalman, Javier, Pati, we appreciate you taking an hour of your day to spend it with us, with our audience. To our audience, we thank you very much for joining us this morning. Please feel free to get in touch with us, via the Asociación de Empresarios Mexicanos. You can Google us, search our website. We're also on Facebook. We hope that this webinar has been valuable to you, as it certainly has been to me. I am Alberto Villarreal, Managing Director of Nepanoa Transformation Advisory and Board Member of the Asociación de Empresarios Mexicanos, and this was our webinar on immigration and what the future holds for the U.S.-Mexico relationship in 2021. Thank you, everybody. Have an excellent day.
Thank you.